The Sheriff and the Outlaw, a Christmas Cabin prequel short story by Danielle Grandinetti. Friday, December 21st, 1928, Northwoods, Wisconsin. Sheriff Casper Yarwood peered around the giant oak tree, gaze pinned to the unsuspecting outlaw poking at his campfire in the deepening dusk. Cold air whispered of possible snow. Casper rested his palm against his pistol grip. He'd leave the weapon holstered. For now. He doubted Walter Branson would go willingly. 6 months ago, Branson held up the Manitowish Waters General Store. Casper had been there. Could have stopped him. Should have stopped him. Except Branson took the kind old Mrs. Holland hostage, and once he had his take, tossed Mrs. Holland at Casper. He had no choice but to catch her before she crashed into the hot wood stove. Casper pressed his free hand into the bark of the oak, the biting pressure forcing his mind back to the present. His nose twitched against the chill. Hunting an outlaw wasn't how he wanted to spend the weekend before Christmas. But when the rumor came into the office this afternoon that Branson had been spotted up on the northern edge of his county, Casper left immediately to track him down. The outlaw speared a piece of meat and rotated it over the flames. Casper dropped to a crouch, weighing Branson's weapon against his distraction. The man had proven his willingness to kill, even in front of a lawman. The memory of the 2 men who had tried to stop Branson as he made his getaway forced Casper to rub his temple. With Mrs. Holland in his arms, Casper had been powerless when the pair jumped Branson, only to receive fatal gunshots for their effort. Lord, steady my mind, help me bring Branson to justice. Peace relaxed Casper's shoulders. He blew into his hands. Time to apprehend a murderer. On silent feet, he crept forward, the moonless night providing cover. A wolf howled. Branson raised his head, alert. Casper froze, scarcely breathing. Branson shrugged and rotated his spit of meat. Casper waited half a beat, then sprang. He took Branson to the ground, tossed the stick and half-cooked meat away. In another moment, he had the outlaw trussed up like a calf, ready for branding. "You'll regret this, Yarwood," Branson hissed. Casper doubted that. Never had bringing in an outlaw felt so good. Snow fell outside as Casper led the bound Branson up the courthouse steps Saturday morning, Deputy Titus Wilburn trailing them. Judge Kavanaugh, uncle to Casper, seeing that the older man was his mother's brother, waited for them. Their footsteps echoed in the silence of the tiled hall. Casper tightened his grip around Branson's arm as they came in sight of his uncle's secretary. Miss Ira May Price had been working for the judge for a couple of years now. No longer in the first blush of youth, sure, but beautiful and with a way about her that could diffuse the crankiest person. Why she remained unmarried, Casper didn't know. He had overheard more than a handful of criminals propose, not to mention the lawyers and other law-abiding citizens that had attempted to garner her attention. Frankly, he didn't understand why anyone, let alone a woman like Miss Price, would want to work for his cantankerous uncle. She paused her typing as she greeted the trio, the clacking of her black typewriter falling silent. Branson whistled. Wilburn stumbled. Casper barely restrained an eye roll at the men's reactions. "We're here to see my uncle, yes." She rose, poised and proper in her gray suit, and seemingly unmoved by the 2 lawmen escorting a murderer past. She motioned them toward a closed wooden door. "The judge is expecting you." "Thank you, Miss Price." He meant only to give her a professional smile, but it warmed when her eyes twinkled in response, sending a spark of something right down to his heart. He tore his gaze away. How could he act with such disrespect, like Wilburn and Branson? With harsh movements, Casper shoved Branson through the doorway to face the judge. Judge Kavanaugh turned from the window, dressed in the black robes of his profession, his hands clasped behind his back. "We will begin shortly." Miss Price slipped in behind them, her brown hair in perfect curls under her gray hat. She set the legal pad on a straight-back chair beside the judge's desk and clasped her hands at her trim waist. "Sir, the lawyers are both expected within 5 minutes." "Thank you, Miss Price." Judge Kavanaugh dismissed his secretary. She turned on her low heels and gave Casper and his entourage a large berth. Good. She respected the danger Branson posed toward. The thought had barely formed before Branson dropped, effectively yanking himself from Casper's grip. Branson swept Casper's leg, and Casper cleared his pistol from its holster as he hit the ground. He aimed it at Branson, only to find Miss Price directly in his sights. Branson had her trapped within the circle of his arms, his bound wrists at her belly, her arms pinned to her sides. Casper's insides froze. This was a repeat of the general store robbery, a hostage situation. Casper had failed to apprehend Branson then, failed to recover the stolen money, failed to save the lives of 2 civilians. Stay where you are and she won't get hurt. Branson peered out from behind Miss Price's hat. While Branson didn't have a weapon, he could easily use the binding tying his wrist to choke her. We are going to walk out that door. If you let us go, I will let her live. Casper lowered his pistol, and Wilburn eased away from Branson's path to the door. My nephew will only capture you again, Mr. Branson. Judge Kavanaugh's stern voice came from behind Casper. Casper wanted to hush his uncle. No matter the truth of the statement, they couldn't afford to escalate this situation. Miss Price's life depended on it. Branson pulled Miss Price with him into the hall. Get your paper knife, little miss, and cut these ropes. Casper pressed his back against the wall beside the doorway, waving his uncle back. He made eye contact with Wilburn to take the shot if he had one, without endangering Miss Price. Wilburn nodded. Miss Price wordlessly severed the rope with her paper knife, not a tremble in her fingers. The rope fell away, and Branson chuckled, and then a light sparked in Miss Price's eye. No, no, no. She flipped the paper knife around in her hand and plunged it into Branson's thigh. Branson howled as he yanked out the offending weapon and held it to Miss Price's throat. Drop it, Branson. Casper aimed his pistol from one side of the doorway. Wilburn ducked low, aiming from the other side. Let her go. If you don't stop the bleeding, you'll die. Miss Price angled her chin away from the sharp edge. I give you 10 minutes. And you'll bleed out if you don't come along willingly. Branson pressed the knife to her neck hard enough to cause a trickle of blood to run down her skin. Casper worked to stay calm and keep a steady hand on his weapon. Certainly, Mr. Branson. Miss Price winced. Let us be off, then. What is she doing? Wilburn whispered. Casper wished he knew. If Branson got her out of the building, surely he'd kill her. Branson walked backward slowly, limping on his leg. Miss Price closed her eyes. Closer they went to the hall where Casper would lose sight of them. Branson's limp worsened, and then his knee buckled. Miss Price broke free, but not without getting a nasty slice to her neck. Casper leapt toward her, shoving his pistol into its holster and yanking off his coat. Get Branson, he shouted at Wilburn as Miss Price slipped to the floor, her blood dripping over the hand she held to her throat. Footsteps sounded behind them, then a scuffle. Casper wanted to back up his deputy, but he couldn't let Miss Price bleed out. He cradled her on his lap, pressing the sleeve of his coat to her neck. Her breathing came fast and her knuckles whitened as they gripped his forearm. She blinked open her eyes. It hurts, but it isn't too deep. How can you tell? He didn't dare lift his coat away from the wound. Yet even as he asked, he realized blood didn't soak the fabric as he expected. Judge Kavanaugh knelt opposite Casper. I called the doctor. How are you, dear? His tone was unusually gentle, almost indulgent, as if speaking to a daughter or granddaughter. It caused Casper's gaze to spring toward the young woman who garnered such kindness from the gruff old man. She pulled his hand away, and he realized she was right. The wound wasn't deep. It would need stitches and would scar, but it didn't threaten her life. He's gone, Wilburn joined them with a sigh. Dead. Miss Price blanched. Did I? No. Wilburn shook his head, and the haunted look he gave Casper confirmed it had been a choice between Wilburn's life and Branson's, a feeling the young man would have to live with the rest of his life. Guilt stabbed Casper. He couldn't stop Branson's original robbery, couldn't save those 2 civilians, couldn't protect Miss Price, and he couldn't shield his deputy. What kind of sheriff was he? The question haunted Casper all weekend. By the time Christmas Day arrived, he could barely stomach the goose his aunt cooked, and it prompted his uncle to demand Casper's presence at his office first thing in the morning on the 26th. Casper's steps slowed as he reached the place where Branson died, and his heartbeat quickened when he reached the place where he thought Miss Price would bleed out in his arms. "He's expecting you, Sheriff Yarwood," Miss Price interrupted his morbid thoughts. She stood behind her desk, looking as pretty and poised as she had on Saturday. "What are you doing here?" He grimaced. "I'm sorry, I meant, how are you doing?" Her smile filled her eyes with compassion. "I'm doing quite fine, Sheriff, thanks to you." Her fingers traced the bandage under her chin, the injury he'd allowed. Casper clenched his teeth and strode into his uncle's office, pulling his badge from where it was pinned to his lapel. "Nephew?" Judge Kavanaugh looked up from his papers, his brows pulled down as Casper slapped the star on the desk. "I'm resigning." The rightness of this decision surged through him. "Titus will make a fine sheriff in my place." The judge's scowl deepened. "Deputy Wilburn is too young to be sheriff." "Well, I can't be one." Casper spun on his heel before the emotion that had been churning inside spewed forth. "Where are you going?" Judge Kavanaugh's demand slowed Casper's escape. Casper didn't quite look over his shoulder. "The cabin, and I'd like to be alone." "I don't think that's wise, son." Tears smarted as guilt rose with gale force. "It's what I must do." He didn't wait for his uncle to reply. He stormed out of the office, chased by the whirlwind growing in his chest. "Sheriff!" Miss Price followed him down the hall. Only chivalry had him pausing, but he couldn't speak. She touched his arm. "Thank you for saving me. It made this Christmas, well, without you, this Christmas would have looked a lot different for my mother and siblings. You have our eternal gratitude." Heaps of coals, those words. He glanced at the hand that touched his coat, a different coat than the one he'd used to staunch her wound. Disappearing was the right decision, for everyone. "Goodbye, Ira May." She squeezed before she released him. "Merry Christmas, Casper." Maybe someday it would be.